Welcome to PR Done and Dunner. I am your host, Bob Geller. Today's guest is a writer and consultant. He's authored both fiction and nonfiction books. He's also written hundreds of articles. He's a book coach and helps solopreneurs and business leaders establish themselves as thought leaders in their industries to gain authority, visibility, to make more money. And actually, that's how I found this guest. It was great writing. His name is Diego Pineda, and I'd like to welcome him to the podcast. Diego, welcome. Great to have you on.
Thank you, Bob. It's a pleasure to be here.
Awesome. I thought, I have a bunch of questions. I wanted to drill down more on some of the ideas you discussed in that article. But first, perhaps it'd be better if the audience hears more about who you are and how we got to this place. I mean, it seems to me, just from reading your background, you started out in writing, primarily writing, and then you branched also into some book coaching. And now it seems that you have established thought leadership in your own niche, which is thought leadership for solo entrepreneurs and business executives. So it'd be interesting to hear a little bit more about that journey.
Right. So I would say I've been writing my whole life since I was in journalism school. And I think the first job I got out of grad school was at the University of Texas, where I was a science writer.
Did you have a background in science, or why science writer?
So I have a master's in science journalism.
Oh, wow.
And that's when I was out of college, I was very interested in science, and that's what I wanted to do, right? So I did that for about 10 years as a medical writer. And the fact of, getting complex information and putting it out in lay terms for people who are not doctors, who are not scientists, taught me a lot about, communicating and writing clearly. And then I use those skills to move into business, into sales, marketing. And finally, just recently during the pandemic, I realized, there's a gap here, just how people stand out, how business people stand out. And it had to do with thought leadership. And that's how I came to start doing research, interviewing people, talking a lot in groups and communities about the topic of thought leadership. And then this is my niche today, writing about thought leadership and how to come up with original content.
It seems like you also practice what you preach. I mean, one of the things I know you say is that an important tip is for, thought leaders in training, thought leaders who want to establish themselves as thought leaders. It's good to build your own IP, namely go out there and write books, right? So you've written books. You've authored a number of fiction and nonfiction books, right?
Correct. Yes. So as I say, I'm a writer. So when I was a medical writer, I actually wrote a couple of scientific books. So one co-authored with an MD about vaccine safety and infectious diseases. So that was pretty interesting. Another one about how to become a medical writer, and different topics, and also fiction, as you mentioned. And right now I'm focusing on the thought leadership space.
That's awesome. I consider myself a writer. I do a lot of writing. In the PR field, we do a lot of writing. I love writing. I also come from a science background. Believe it or not, I started out in engineering. And here I am in PR. Cool. And did you ever consider working in journalism, or veering more toward the science side of things? Or
so I did a bit of journalism, like writing for columns for newspapers, and did a bit of radio for a while. But right now, working in tech and entrepreneurship, and with some companies, like I did freelancing for a while. So I think it's more lucrative, and there are more interesting things. And thought leadership, you have to focus on a niche, and that's part of the things I like to do. And just writing news, I think it's not what I like to do, right?
Well, great. So anyway, again, we connected over this article that you wrote, which I guess is a chapter in your book. The name of the article is Content Marketing is Dying. Here's why you need to develop thought leadership instead. And that is from the Solo Thought Leader book, right?
Correct. Yes. So this is one chapter in the Solo Thought Leader book.
I'm going to include a link in the show notes so people know how to find you and find that book. But I have to admit, when I saw the article, first I was skeptical because of the melodramatic headline. Another one of those XX is dead or dying posts, but then again, I've written my share of those. And it drew me in. So it actually did its work. And then as I kept on reading, I thought, well, wait a second. Isn't Diego just describing a better form of content marketing? I mean, after all, the article that reached me was thought leadership, but it was also arguably an example of content marketing too. But I kept on reading. I read it to the end and I realized that I thought you're really onto something. And your take on thought leadership versus content marketing really intrigued me. So maybe you could, just to bring everybody else up to speed who hasn't read the article, maybe you could just share a few words about what your thesis was for that article, what the idea was about it.
Right. So I've been in content marketing for 15 years or more. And I started about in 2004, just writing content, as I said, for medical stuff. And back then it was very easy to rank. And you would write some articles and you would get some traffic, some traction, and people interested, right? And but through the years, it's interesting that content marketing has become this race to rank no matter what. And people are not writing for humans, but are writing for the algorithm. And been talking to people and did it myself, where we just try to rank and spend a lot of time, resources, just doing content that is really not for reading. I actually had a conversation with an SEO agency recently, and they said, we can get you to page one of Google, and we're going to write all these articles. But these articles are not really for anyone to read, they're just for ranking. And that's the reality, right? So I'd say there must be a better way, and especially because solopreneurs and small businesses, they're going to try to rank, and they think, okay, this is the way that big companies do it. And big companies have a lot of resources, and they're being around for longer, and it's easier for them to put all the effort into ranking. But my thesis in the article is that this is broken, and if you're a solopreneur or a small business, you should not try to do SEO as your first or priority in marketing. You should do thought leadership, and thought leadership means you're an expert in your niche, you have unique ideas, and then you're going to stand out for the crowd, not because you're trying to rank for a popular keyword, but because you have a different angle and unique point of view, and people are going to say, wow, I never thought of this before.
Interesting. I can relate to some of these challenges that you point out in the article, because some of the things, it wasn't specifically about PR or about content and SEO, but some of the same realities apply. I mean, we're dealing with a landscape where there's too much information, too much competition for attention, keywords too, of course. The big brands have an advantage, the big stories have an advantage. So PR teams who are increasingly doing content marketing, who've always done thought leadership, have been working on these very things, but apparently you have a way to, I guess, do it in a more effective way. And I'd be interested to hear your take. Like, what advice would you offer PR and content marketing teams who are trying to support thought leadership efforts to improve their game?
So the first thing you have to do is, if you're working with a company, you're working with some CEOs or leaders or businesses, what is their POV? What is the point of view? Or do they have a framework that's unique to them? And what I mean for frameworks, how do they help their clients that's unique? Is there a method? Is there a set of principles? Is there a step-by-step that they do? Is there a specific software that does certain things? Are they building or creating a category in the market? And use that for your PR efforts. So if you're going to pitch a story to the media, for example, you're going to create a story that has a unique angle or unique point of view. And it's not just a copycat of everything. It's not just the typical press release with the two quotes and the introduction and, just the facts, but you have a unique point of view. And then also you have a unique style. You can see that, I mean, I'm not a PR expert, but you can see a lot of PR stuff just repeating the jargon.
Yep.
Of corporate jargon of, our vision is to be the most innovative company in our space and stuff, blah, 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 blah. Right. So if you have a different style, that's going to make you unique. Even if you just write and speak in a way that's different. And some advice I usually give to people, so let's say, for example, someone in the self-help space, let's say Tony Robbins. What's unique about Tony? Tony uses profanity in his language, and that just shocks people and takes them out of their pattern,
I
right?
could do that, by the way. I mean, can I be Tony Robbins? No, I'm kidding.
Yeah, for sure, right? Sometimes people are just very, conversational, or they're funny, or they tell jokes, or they're just, irreverent. So I think PR people can also learn from this. It's just get away from the jargon, and have a unique language, unique style, and that's giving voice to the brand. That's giving a special personality that's different from everybody else.
That makes sense. And I would like to, I guess, for the purpose of this conversation, I don't know if we have to really separate PR or content marketing or thought leadership. These three things often overlap. They support each other, I think, when done right. And a good piece of content marketing certainly could be a good piece of thought leadership, right? But I guess I'm just trying to understand more about what you're saying as far as a unique POV. Does that mean having like pet topics, or is it about like you were saying, a personality style, like a Tony Robbins, or maybe a combination, or maybe it's different things for different people?
I think it's both. But I mentioned a framework, so you need a framework, and this is what thought leadership it's about. You start with a framework with, okay, what's your point of view? What are the three main topics that you want to talk about, and what's your opinion about it? So I recently wrote an article, why being opinionated is a good thing. And people shy away from, some people like it, some people hate it, right? Oh, this is what I think about religion or politics. But I'm not talking about what's your opinion about religion or politics, but what's your opinion, or what are your strong opinions about the main issues in your industry? You have to take a stand. And when you take a stand, from that, you can create a lot of content. But it's not just about, oh, here are the pros, here are the cons, you decide. That's not thought leadership. Thought leadership is leading with your thoughts, saying, okay, these are the main issues, and these are the dogmas in my industry. What if they're not true? What if there's a different way? And then you start going against the grain and developing your own thoughts, and not just following what everybody's saying. So that's one of the ways of creating thought leadership.
Before we move on to another, I really like that. And I know, in fact, that's what I think compelled me to read your article, because it took a stand. It was provocative. Other nice things you did were use examples, use data. You were not afraid to take shots at others in the industry who perhaps were, not in sync with your line of thinking. I guess, is there a danger though? I mean, I guess maybe, are you coming from the perspective that to get attention, you have to be provocative, right? But it seems to me you're gonna lose some people too, possibly, who don't agree with you. Is that possible?
Yeah, I think that's totally true. You have to be provocative because you want to stand out, but it's not just being a contrarian because you just want to, but you really have to think this through. So if you're gonna have a contrarian view, then you need to think this through, and you have to say, okay, here's the data, here's the examples, here's why I believe what I believe, and these are the reasons. And you have to prove it, and you have to stand by it. And it's not, and you say, yeah, you're gonna lose some people, and that's great, that's awesome, because you don't only want to define who you're writing for, but who you are not writing for. And you want, and you want to weed out all the people who are not supposed to be your audience or your clients. And in business, we talk about, qualifying our leads. And what a thought leader does is he or she qualifies the tribe. And when you define, these are my positions, this is what I believe, and people say, I believe that too, then they're part of your tribe and they're going to follow you.
That's great. And I think that gets on to another one of your points, which we'll get to in a moment. But first, it's hard to avoid this topic because we're in such a polarized society. And I assume, it seems to me, pretty straightforward that you're talking about business things. You're not talking about politics or religion, left, right, because more and more, as you know, brands are being pulled into those culture war battles, and they got to pick a position. But you're not talking about things that are so possibly um, dangerous, or are you?
No, no, definitely not. I mean, like, I'm taking a stab at, why you shouldn't do SEO as a primary thing. And I got a lot of people who would just call me out and say, "You're wrong. SEO is great. And you should do it." And I said, "Okay, thanks for disagreeing, but I stand by my comments because it's a trend I see. It's something that I see in my experience and talking to others. So I'm not talking about moral issues. I'm talking about things in my industry. And for example, they're just best practices, people call best practices.
Sure.
But what if the best practices are not that good? What if there's another way of doing things? And that's where you start going against the grain and saying, okay, why do we accept? So my question that I usually ask is, why do I believe what I believe? And for instance, let me give you an example. In business, uh, there's something, a tenant that says that you should be customer centric. Okay, sounds good, sounds great.
Yeah, who'd argue with
But
that?
yeah, but then I said, should you always be customer centric? When would be a time for you to not be customer centric? And I found that when you're creating a category where you're innovating, you cannot be customer centric. You have to be cost centric. That means you have a cost, you have a vision of the future, and many people will be against it because it goes against the status quo, against the best practices, against the way things are done. So you have to stick to your guns and go through with it, and for that reason, not be customer centric. And and there's the famous quote from Steve Jobs, like he would, if he had asked people what they wanted, they wouldn't know, and he would have created the iPhone or the iPod or whatever.
Yeah, no, I really love that. And that's something we try to practice at our agency. It's a philosophy called play bigger, which I don't know if you've heard of that, but I could send you a link.
Of course, yeah.
It's about category engineering. It's about doing exactly what you're saying, going out there and building that category and not waiting for customers to ask you. Um, but why don't we move on to some of the other tips that you offered in that article? You talked about the importance of taking a deep dive into niches, building community. Do you want to go through some of those other tips and examples if you have those?
For sure. So you cannot be everything to everyone. And if you want to be a thought leader, you have to become an expert first. And you cannot be an expert on everything. So you have to pick. And for a solopreneur, for a business owner, or a company, if they pick a niche and they can go deep into that niche and become the experts in your niche, that's what's going to differentiate them and help them succeed. So I would say, first, I say, learn everything you can about your industry, read broadly. And then once you know all the basics, you can start branching out and then asking the question and say, okay, what if this is not true? What if there's another way? Then you start looking at other industries and say, okay, maybe while working on engineering or on medicine, can I bring that and make an analogy or a parallel to my industry, to my business, and come up with innovative thoughts? So those are the ways that you start going deep and then you go broad, meaning that all the basics, and then that's when this is what the musicians do. They learn all the basics, and then after they know the basics, they can improvise.
That makes sense. That makes sense. Is there any connection between that and building community, or is that a separate tip that you had?
I think building community stems from that, because when you have a niche, you have people who will decide to follow you. Let's say you're writing on LinkedIn, you're posting on LinkedIn. If you post about anything that comes to mind and you don't find a niche, people are gonna have a hard time deciding if they're gonna follow you. But if you keep writing about one or two topics or three topics max, then people will start seeing, okay, this person is talking about public relations, and this person has a good grasp on how to do PR. Oh, I'm going to follow him because I'm interested in that topic. But if you talk about PR one day, then you talk about politics the other day, then you talk about, what you ate for breakfast the next day, people are not going to know if it's worth following you, and they won't. So that's how you create a community.
I see. That leads to all kinds of questions. I mean, communities where, which channels? Is it a passive kind of idea where you're just putting great content out and hoping they find you? Are you going out there and actually engaging with these communities and posting to them? Or
I don't think it's possible to create community if you don't engage with them.
yeah,
You see a lot of influencers that have a lot of followers, but they never answer the questions or interact with them in the comments. But that's not a community. That's just a lot of followers.
Mhm.
But a real community is where you get people involved, asking questions. You interact with them, and there's a lot of things. A lot of I've seen thought leaders. They have community Facebook groups or Slack groups or Discord uh, groups. So there are many platforms where you can do that. Some are intentional, some are you have to pay a fee for that, some are others are free. But the fact is that people want, and I think this is what some of the experts now are seeing is the future, like more than just social media where everybody is commenting and interacting and liking stuff. People are interacting in communities, and you see more interaction. So I'm part of a few communities, and I see that there's a lot more interaction in those private groups that there is on social media. People who would never comment on social media, they're very active on these communities.
And what about developing a unique voice and style?
Okay, so we talked about that, right? So I would say if you're doing it by yourself, for yourself, right, as a solopreneur, just be mindful of what's natural for you. So I would say, people, take note of your style when you are with family and friends, how you speak. Are you funny? Or are you serious? Are you a person of a few words, or do you like to talk a lot? And then incorporate those things into your writing, into your
Wait a
content.
second. It's supposed to be really you and not some persona?
Exactly.
That makes sense. I mean, it's probably easiest to be yourself, I guess, than create a fake persona. But
I mean, I think in this era where there's so many influencers living fake lives, people
yeah,
are really thirsty and eager for raw honesty and sincerity. And people can read through it. If you're not yourself, people can actually tell. So just be you.
and then another one of your tips sounds awfully a lot to me like you've heard of the creator economy and about creators. But part of what you're saying is go out there and create, right? Create your own intellectual property, your own content, right? That's a big part of it. I mean, that seems very labor intensive. How many CEOs or solopreneurs have time to write a book? Um, and how important is that to the whole process?
Well, I've talked to many thought leaders, interviewed many thought leaders for my book, and I asked them the question: Is how important is it to write a book? And they said it's very important because one is going to give you the authority, the recognition, whether you like it or not, whether people read it or not. The fact that you're an author. I mean, you get invited to podcasts like this one, right? Because you wrote something. So
Absolutely.
your name is out there. Second, when what you gotta do is you gotta have that framework I talked about very well described in your book, and that's gonna help people understand what you're saying, and they're gonna be able to amplify the message. So this is gonna just uh, make your audience larger, and you're gonna talk about it. You're gonna refer to it, and because it's let's put it this way: when you write a book, you have to organize all your thoughts
Yeah.
in a system, in a way that makes sense. And that's going to help you not just with the book, but whenever you're doing public
Mm.
speaking or consulting or coaching or writing whatever content, because you sat down for a few months and you put everything down and you organize your thoughts, right? It's not the same when you have some ideas, scatter ideas, than when you have them written down and organized in a way that makes sense.
Well, you are inspiring me. I've had a number of book ideas. I've tried to write some nonfiction, rather some fiction. I've thought about writing nonfiction. And if you think about it, I've been blogging for over 10 years. So I've probably written several books on my blog.
Exactly.
But
Exactly.
like you, I mean, I'm sensing that you really enjoy writing, and I love to write. And it's a matter of the time and discipline. And, since we connected, I've been following your LinkedIn postings. Somewhere you said, just write, just get off your butt and write already, enough excuses. So I
Yeah.
strongly encourage people to find and follow Diego on, on LinkedIn. And are there other channels? What about your own thought leadership? Where do you, I don't know, where do you hang out? Where do you publish? Where do you post?
So I post, I have a newsletter, and the newsletter is called Think Right Lead, and I'll
Okay.
teach you how to write like a thought leader.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's publish every week. I publish articles on Medium, where you found my
Yep.
article, of course. And then every single day I post on LinkedIn.
That's great. And are your articles, I think the article I found actually was syndicated or ran somewhere else, some kind of marketing publication, or is that your publication?
Yeah, there's a few publications on Medium that you can submit to. So I think that one's on a publication called Better Marketing, but it's inside Medium.
Super. Anything else you'd like to add to our conversation, or anything you're working on now that you'd like to highlight, or any final words of advice?
Yeah, I mean, doing thought leadership, sometimes it's hard because if you're working for a company or for clients, people usually want results right now. And I think thought leadership, it's a long-term commitment that you want to build up, and it's going to bring a lot of interesting results, but sometimes it's hard to measure. I would say, like, and public relations, some of the public relations initiatives, they're hard to measure,
Oh yeah,
right?
definitely.
So it's not easy, but it requires a long-term commitment. But I think it's worth it, and it's worth it because what I like to say is, why try to be better when you can be the only one?
Those are great words to close on. And I guess with that, we'll say, I'm done. You can be doneer today. So we're done. But
Yeah, we're done.
I appreciate I appreciate your time. First of all, thank you for sharing your insight and your time. And I encourage everyone who's watching and listening to check out the show notes. And I'll include a link to Diego's book, Solo Thought Leader, and other information. And hopefully we can stay in touch, Diego. It's been great having you on. Thank you so much.
Well done. Thanks.
Take care.